The Boeing 737 cruised at 37,000 feet above the Pacific, its passengers lost in the familiar rhythm of commercial flight. In seat 14C, Major Evangeline Ghost Thorne slept against the window, her weathered flight jacket serving as a makeshift pillow. The faded squadron patches told stories most would never understand, stories written in contrails and courage, in split-second decisions that separated the living from the legends. She had been flying for 18 hours straight before catching this red-eye from Honolulu to Seattle. 3 weeks of leave, 3 weeks to forget the weight of command, the sound of her wingman's final transmission, the way desert sand looks when it's kissed by burning jet fuel. But forgetting, she had learned, was a luxury combat pilots couldn't afford. The intercom crackled to life, jolting passengers from their digital distractions and fitful sleep. Captain Martinez's voice carried an edge that made seasoned travelers straighten in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have an unusual situation developing, and I need to ask, are there any military pilots aboard this aircraft? Please press your call button immediately." Ghost's eyes opened slowly, that predatory stillness that marked her breed. Around her, passengers exchanged nervous glances, whispering theories about mechanical failures and emergency landings. But Ghost heard something else in the captain's voice, something that made her pulse quicken and her tactical mind engage. This wasn't about their aircraft. Through the small window, she caught a glimpse of what had prompted the announcement. Two dark silhouettes paralleled their course, barely visible against the star-drunk sky. The aircraft were sleek, angular, with a distinctive profile she knew better than her own reflection. F-22 Raptors, flying without navigation lights, maintaining perfect formation at impossible proximity to civilian airspace. Her hand moved instinctively to the call button, then hesitated. The last time she had answered a call like this, it had ended with 14 body bags and a medal she kept in a drawer, never worn, never displayed. The Air Force had quietly suggested her leave become permanent after the Kandahar incident. Too many risks, they said. Too many questions about her methods, her willingness to break protocol when lives hung in the balance. But those Raptors outside weren't conducting a routine escort. Their positioning, their flight pattern, Ghost recognized it immediately. Someone was hunting, and Commercial Flight 2847 had just become either the prey or the shield. As the murmur of anxious passengers filled the cabin, Major Evangeline Thorne made a choice that would transform an ordinary Tuesday into the kind of story documentaries are made of. The captain waited, his voice betraying nothing of the radio chatter filling his headset, the increasingly urgent communications from air traffic control, and the classified briefing that had just turned his routine flight into something that would be dissected in war colleges for decades to come. Captain Rodriguez Martinez had been flying commercial for 15 years, accumulating over 20,000 flight hours in everything from regional turboprops to wide-body internationals. He had weathered severe turbulence over the Rockies, navigated around Category 5 hurricanes, and once landed a crippled 757 with failing hydraulics at Denver International. But nothing in his extensive logbook had prepared him for the transmission he had just received from Seattle Center. United 2847, be advised you have military assets converging on your position. Maintain present heading and altitude until further notice. Do not deviate from assigned flight path without explicit clearance. Through his headset, Rodriguez could hear the controlled tension in the air traffic controller's voice. In the background, multiple radio frequencies buzzed with activity, military channels that civilian pilots weren't supposed to monitor, coded transmissions that spoke of things happening beyond the normal scope of commercial aviation. First Officer Sarah Kim checked her instruments for the third time in 2 minutes, her movements precise but betraying the stress that any experienced pilot would recognize. "Captain, I'm showing 2 contacts on our starboard side, maintaining parallel course. They're not squawking civilian transponders." Rodriguez nodded grimly. He had spotted them, two dark shapes against the night sky, flying with the kind of precision that marked military aircraft operating under combat conditions. His years of Air National Guard service, flying C-130s in and out of hostile territories, had taught him to recognize the difference between routine military exercises and something altogether more serious. The secure radio channel crackled again. United 2847, this is Falcon Lead. We have a situation developing. Are there any military pilots aboard your aircraft? We need someone who can assist with tactical assessment and potential coordination. Rodriguez felt the weight of his responsibility. 298 souls aboard his aircraft, most of them civilians who had boarded expecting nothing more eventful than airline coffee and recycled air. But the urgency in the military pilot's voice suggested that their safety might depend on capabilities beyond those required for commercial aviation. His announcement to the passenger cabin had been carefully worded, revealing enough to solicit help while avoiding the kind of panic that could complicate an already volatile situation. Now he waited, hoping that among his passengers was someone with the experience to help navigate whatever crisis was unfolding at 37,000 feet. In the cabin behind him, Ghost felt the familiar weight of command settling around her shoulders like an old flight suit. The call button under her finger represented a threshold she had hoped never to cross again, the boundary between civilian life and the world, where split-second decisions carried consequences measured in body counts and congressional hearings. But those raptors outside weren't part of any training exercise, and the fear in the first officer's voice spoke of something far more serious than a routine military interception. Ghost pressed the call button, feeling destiny engage like afterburners in the darkness. The flight attendant who approached Ghost's seat moved with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to handle everything from air sickness to heart attacks, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty about this particular situation. Jennifer Walsh had been flying commercial routes for 12 years, long enough to recognize when a routine flight transformed into something unprecedented. "Ma'am, the captain would like to speak with you in the cockpit," Jennifer said, her voice professionally calm despite the unusual circumstances. Around them, passengers craned their necks, trying to decipher the significance of military personnel being summoned to the front of the aircraft. Ghost unbuckled her seatbelt with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to rapid deployment. As she stood, her jacket fell open, revealing the subdued wings and ribbons that marked her as more than just another passenger. The man in 14B, an insurance salesman from Portland, caught sight of her decorations and felt something shift in his perception of their situation. This wasn't just another flight delay. Walking toward the cockpit, Ghost processed the subtle signs that most passengers missed. The flight attendant's body language had changed, their movements more purposeful and alert. The aircraft's flight path felt steady, but she could sense the tension radiating from the flight deck. Most telling were the radio calls bleeding through the passenger address system, brief, coded transmissions that spoke of coordination between multiple agencies. Captain Rodriguez looked up as she entered the cockpit, his eyes immediately cataloging her bearing, her decorations, the way she moved through the confined space with military precision. "Major," he said, reading her rank insignia, "I'm Captain Rodriguez. This is First Officer Kim. We need your assessment of our current situation." Ghost moved to the jump seat behind the center console, her gaze immediately drawn to the navigation display. Two contacts maintained perfect formation off their starboard wing, close enough to be visible but far enough to avoid creating wake turbulence. "Call sign Ghost, Air Force. How long have we had company?" "Approximately 12 minutes, Kim replied. "They appeared on our traffic display shortly after we crossed into Seattle Center's airspace. No radio contact, no transponder identification." Rodriguez handed Ghost a set of headphones. "We've been monitoring multiple military frequencies. There's significant activity, but most of it's encrypted or using codes we don't recognize. As Ghost adjusted the headphones, the background radio chatter became clear. Multiple call signs, coordination between ground control and airborne assets, references to priority intercept and unknown target. But it was what she didn't hear that concerned her most. No routine military exercise announcements, no standard procedural language that would indicate a planned operation. "Those are F-22s, she said, pointing toward the shadowy figures outside. Raptors don't typically conduct civilian aircraft intercepts unless there's a specific threat assessment. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. What kind of threat? Ghost studied the tactical display, her mind processing flight patterns, positioning, and the implicit communication represented by the Raptor's formation. Could be several things: hijacking, unknown aircraft in restricted airspace, or, she paused, considering possibilities she hoped were unlikely. They might not be escorting us. We might be bait. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the increasingly urgent radio traffic filling their headphones. Outside, the Raptors maintained their perfect formation, shadows against the star-filled sky, waiting for something none of them could yet identify. The secure military channel crackled with a transmission that made Ghost's blood run cold. Ghost lead to Falcon Squadron. Target acquired, bearing 270, altitude 35,000. Unknown aircraft approaching intercept vector with civilian traffic. Rules of engagement authorized if hostile intent confirmed. Ghost grabbed the radio microphone before Rodriguez could react. Ghost lead. This is Major Evangeline Thorne aboard United 2847. Request immediate tactical briefing and situation status. The response came after a pause that felt like eternity. Ghost, this is Colonel Hayes, 27th Fighter Squadron. Didn't expect to find you aboard that civilian bird. We have a serious situation developing. Unknown military aircraft, possibly foreign, has been shadowing commercial traffic along the West Coast for the past 40 minutes. Your flight appears to be their primary target. Rodriguez felt the color drain from his face. Target for what? Ghost held up a hand, listening intently to the encrypted chatter flowing through multiple channels. Years of combat experience had taught her to parse the controlled urgency in military communications, to read between the lines of tactical language designed to convey maximum information while maintaining operational security. Ghost lead, what's the threat assessment on the unknown aircraft? She transmitted. Single contact, high-performance military jet, definitely not one of ours. Flight characteristics suggest either European or Russian design. No transponder, no response to standard intercept protocols. It's been maintaining surveillance distance on multiple civilian flights, but yours is the first time it's moved to intercept vector. First Officer Kim checked her navigation display, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the implications. Major, if there's a hostile aircraft targeting us, shouldn't we be taking evasive action? Ghost shook her head. At our current speed and altitude, we can't outmaneuver a fighter jet. Our best defense is staying predictable while the Raptors maintain intercept capability. She keyed the radio again. Colonel Hayes, what's your assessment of hostile intent? Unknown at this time, Ghost. The aircraft has made no threatening moves, but its behavior pattern doesn't match any known reconnaissance or surveillance protocol. We're treating this as a potential hijacking attempt or worse. Rodriguez gripped his controls tighter. Worse. Ghost's expression remained carefully neutral, but Rodriguez caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. In today's threat environment, a civilian aircraft can be transformed into a weapon. If someone wanted to conduct a terrorist attack using our plane as the delivery system, they'd need to either take control of the aircraft or force us to follow their flight path. The radio exploded with activity as multiple military call signs reported contact with the unknown aircraft. Through the cockpit windows, Ghost could see the Raptors adjusting their formation, spreading wider to create engagement parameters while maintaining protective positioning relative to the civilian airliner. United 2847, came a new voice over the civilian frequency. This is Seattle Center. You are cleared to maintain present heading and altitude. Do not acknowledge any communications from unauthorized sources. Military assets are coordinating your protection. Ghost looked at the two civilian pilots, seeing in their faces the same expression she had witnessed countless times in combat zones. The moment when ordinary people realized they had become part of something far beyond their training or experience. When survival depended on skills they hoped never to use and decisions they had never prepared to make. Outside the cockpit windows, the unknown aircraft finally revealed itself, a sleek, angular silhouette emerging from the darkness like a predator announcing its presence. Ghost recognized the design immediately. A Sukhoi Su-35, Russian-built air superiority fighter, with enough firepower to turn their Boeing 737 into scattered wreckage across the Pacific Ocean. But it was the aircraft's positioning that truly concerned her, close enough to engage, far enough to avoid immediate retaliation, following the exact flight profile used by pilots preparing for either forced escort or targeted attack. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered, spotting the foreign fighter for the first time. What do they want? Ghost studied the Su-35 flight pattern, her tactical mind processing angles, speeds, and the implicit communication of military aircraft positioning. Could be intelligence gathering, could be a probe of our air defense systems, or, she paused, considering the darkest possibility, could be the opening move of something much larger. The radio channel designated for inter-aircraft communication suddenly activated with a heavily accented voice. United Flight 2847, this is Captain Dmitry Volkov, Russian Air Force. You will alter your heading to bearing 090 and descend to flight level 200. Acknowledge immediately or face consequences. Rodriguez looked at Ghost with a mixture of fear and desperation. Years of commercial flying had never prepared him for international incidents at altitude, for the moment when his passenger airliner became a chess piece in a game played by military superpowers. Ghost keyed the military frequency. Colonel Hayes, do you copy the Russian transmission? Affirmative, Ghost. Do not comply with their instructions. Maintain present heading and altitude. We are cleared to engage if the Su-35 makes any threatening moves toward your aircraft. The tactical situation crystallized in Ghost's mind with the clarity that had made her legendary among combat pilots and controversial among military bureaucrats. The Russian fighter's positioning suggested this wasn't a random encounter but a carefully planned interception. The timing, the location, the specific targeting of their aircraft indicated intelligence gathering that went far beyond routine reconnaissance. Captain Rodriguez, she said quietly, I need you to listen very carefully. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, do not deviate from your assigned flight path without explicit clearance from either Colonel Hayes or Seattle Center. The Russians are testing our response protocols, but they're also putting themselves at tremendous risk by operating in U.S. airspace. First Officer Kim monitored their instruments while tracking the developing air battle on her traffic display. 3 Raptors now flanked their aircraft, with 2 more approaching from different vectors. A combat spread formation designed to provide maximum engagement options while protecting the civilian aircraft caught in the middle. The Russian voice returned, more insistent. United 2847, you have 30 seconds to comply with course change. This is not a request. Ghost felt the familiar rush of combat adrenaline, the heightened awareness that had kept her alive through countless missions over Afghanistan and Iraq. But this situation carried complications that pure military engagement never presented. 298 innocent passengers whose lives depended on decisions made by people they would never meet, whose names they would never know. "Colonel Hayes," she transmitted, "what's the rules of engagement status?" "We are authorized to defend the civilian aircraft using any means necessary." "Ghost, we could use your tactical assessment. You know these situations better than anyone." The weight of command, the responsibility she had tried to leave behind, settled around Ghost's shoulders like an old flight suit. In the cabin behind her, passengers dozed or read or watched movies, unaware that their survival hinged on split-second decisions being made in languages they didn't understand, using protocols designed for situations they couldn't imagine. The Su-35 moved closer, its pilot obviously skilled and confident, flying the kind of precision formation that marked elite military aviators. Ghost recognized the type, the best pilots from any nation, the ones who lived for moments like this, who measured their worth in degrees of risk and margins of error that would terrify ordinary mortals. But recognizing skill didn't mean respecting intent, and Ghost had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were often the most competent ones. The Russian fighters' next move would determine whether this remained a tense international incident or escalated into something that would be analyzed in war colleges and diplomatic summits for decades to come. Ghost checked her watch, calculated fuel states and engagement timelines, and prepared for the kind of decision that had defined her controversial career. The moment when following orders conflicted with saving lives, when the book provided no guidance for the impossible choice between duty and conscience. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly below them, indifferent to human conflicts, while above, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in shades that reminded Ghost of tracer fire and burning cities. The Russian pilot's ultimatum expired in 15 seconds, and Ghost could sense the collective tension of multiple aircraft crews waiting for someone to make the first move, in a deadly game of three-dimensional chess played at 600 miles per hour. The digital countdown in Ghost's mind reached zero, and Captain Volkov's voice returned with the flat precision of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "United 2847, you have not complied. Consequences will follow." The Su-35 rolled inverted and dove beneath their aircraft, a maneuver that demonstrated both the Russian pilot's skill and his willingness to operate at dangerous proximity to the civilian airliner. Ghost watched the fighter's movement with professional admiration and growing concern. Volkov was clearly an experienced combat pilot, the kind who understood that psychological pressure often achieved more than direct threats. "He's trying to spook us into making a mistake," Ghost told Rodriguez. "Classic intimidation tactics, stay on course and altitude." Colonel Hayes's voice crackled over the military frequency. "All Falcon elements, unknown aircraft has initiated aggressive maneuvering near protected civilian traffic. Falcon 2 and 3 move to engagement positions. Falcon 4 and 5 maintain protective formation." Through the cockpit windows, Ghost could see the American fighters adjusting their positions, creating what military tacticians call a defensive box, a formation designed to protect the civilian aircraft while providing multiple engagement angles against the threat. It was textbook air defense, executed with the precision that marked the U.S. Air Force's elite squadrons. But Ghost had learned in combat that textbook solutions didn't always account for the unpredictable human element, the moment when training collided with desperation, or national pride, or simple miscalculation. The Su-35 completed its intimidation pass and climbed back to their altitude, positioning itself directly ahead of the Boeing 737 at a distance that made Rodriguez grip his controls until his knuckles turned white. At their current closing speed, they would reach merge distance, the point where collision became unavoidable, in less than 90 seconds. "United 2847, Volkov transmitted. "Alter course now or I will be forced to take more direct action." Ghost keyed the radio. "Captain Volkov, this is Major Evangeline Thorne, United States Air Force. You are operating illegally in U.S. airspace and threatening a civilian aircraft. Withdraw immediately or face engagement by our fighters." The pause that followed stretched long enough for Ghost to wonder if she had miscalculated, if introducing herself as a military officer aboard the civilian aircraft would escalate rather than diffuse the situation. Military pilots understood each other in ways that transcended national boundaries. They shared the same training, the same risks, the same understanding of what it meant to fly aircraft designed for combat. But they also understood honor and consequences in ways that could make peaceful resolution more difficult. "Major Thorne," Volkov's voice carried a note of recognition, "I know your reputation, the Ghost of Kandahar. You understand what it means to make hard choices." Rodriguez looked at Ghost with new understanding. The Ghost of Kandahar. He had heard the story. Everyone in military aviation had heard it. The female pilot who had single-handedly held off an enemy squadron long enough for a rescue operation to succeed, who had broken direct orders to engage superior forces because American troops were dying on the ground below. "Captain Volkov," Ghost replied, "I understand the difference between hard choices and stupid ones. You're outnumbered 5-1, operating outside your territorial boundaries and threatening civilians. What's your endgame here?" The Russian fighter maintained its position directly ahead, close enough now that Rodriguez could make out individual details of its construction. The swept wings, the twin vertical stabilizers, the missile pylons that carried enough firepower to destroy a dozen civilian aircraft. "Perhaps," Volkov transmitted, "we can discuss this pilot to pilot. You will understand better than your escort fighters what is really happening here." Ghost felt a chill that had nothing to do with altitude or air conditioning. Military pilots didn't typically initiate philosophical discussions during international incidents unless they were stalling for time, gathering intelligence, or preparing for something that required justification. "I'm listening," she replied, while simultaneously signaling Colonel Hayes on the military frequency that this conversation might reveal crucial intelligence about Russian intentions. "Your government has been conducting surveillance flights along our borders for months," Volkov said. "Always civilian aircraft, always with interesting passengers, always carrying equipment that standard airliners do not require. We decided to conduct our own reconnaissance." Ghost's tactical mind processed the implications immediately. If the Russians suspected that civilian flights were being used for intelligence gathering, then this intercept wasn't random. It was a message, a demonstration that American intelligence operations weren't as invisible as they appeared. But it was also something more dangerous, a probe of American response capabilities, a test of how quickly and decisively U.S. forces would engage to protect civilian aircraft, valuable intelligence for anyone planning larger-scale operations. The radio filled with encrypted chatter as multiple agencies coordinated response to what was rapidly becoming a significant international incident. Colonel Hayes's voice cut through the tactical communications. "Ghost, we're getting reports of similar intercepts occurring simultaneously along the entire West Coast. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a coordinated operation." Ghost felt her pulse quicken as the true scope of the situation became clear. Multiple Russian aircraft, multiple intercepts, all occurring at the same time. This was either an intelligence-gathering operation of unprecedented boldness or the opening move of something far more serious. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the Su-35 pilot in his helmet and oxygen mask, close enough now to make out individual details of his flight suit and equipment. For a moment, two combat pilots studied each other across the vast emptiness of the Pacific sky, each calculating odds and options, each representing national interests that extended far beyond their individual aircraft. The moment balanced on the edge of decision, where a single wrong move could transform a tense standoff into the kind of international incident that changed the course of history. The encrypted military channel erupted with urgent transmissions as the full scope of the Russian operation became clear. Ghost listened to the coordinated reports flowing in from multiple sectors: Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, each describing similar intercepts of civilian aircraft by unidentified military fighters. Ghost, this is NORAD Command. A new voice cut through the tactical chatter. We're tracking 12 separate incidents along the Pacific coast. All targets are civilian aircraft with specific passenger manifests. You appear to be carrying someone of particular interest to them. Rodriguez felt his mouth go dry. Someone on our plane. Ghost's mind raced through the possibilities. Intelligence officers, military contractors, government officials traveling under civilian cover. Any number of passengers could be valuable enough to justify this level of risk and coordination from Russian intelligence services. Captain Volkov, she transmitted, if you're looking for someone specific, identify them. Let the civilian aircraft continue to their destination. The Russian pilot's response carried an undertone that Ghost recognized from her own combat experience. The voice of someone operating under orders they didn't entirely agree with, but would follow regardless of personal feelings. Major Thorne, among your passengers is Dr. Elena Vasquez, formerly of Los Alamos National Laboratory, currently carrying research data related to hypersonic weapons development. My government requires a conversation with her. Ghost felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Dr. Vasquez, she had heard the name in classified briefings, a brilliant physicist who had defected from Russia 15 years ago and had been instrumental in advancing American hypersonic weapons technology. If she was aboard their flight with sensitive research data, then the Russian operation wasn't just reconnaissance. It was attempted extraction or assassination. Colonel Hayes, Ghost transmitted on the military frequency. We need passenger manifest verification for Dr. Elena Vasquez, traveling under possible alias, and we need to know what kind of research she's carrying. The response came back within seconds. Confirmed. Dr. Vasquez is aboard your aircraft, Seat 12A, traveling under diplomatic passport. She's carrying classified research materials related to Project Starfire. Rodriguez looked at Ghost with growing alarm. Project Starfire. Hypersonic weapons development, Ghost replied grimly. The kind of technology that changes the balance of power between nations, the kind that people kill for. The Su-35 moved closer still, now flying in formation so tight that wake turbulence from the fighter began affecting the civilian aircraft's stability. Volkov was demonstrating that he could force them down whenever he chose, that their safety depended entirely on his restraint and professional skill. Major Thorne, the Russian pilot transmitted, you have 5 minutes to produce Dr. Vasquez for transfer to my aircraft. If you refuse, I will be forced to escort your plane to a destination of my choosing. Ghost felt the weight of impossible choices settling around her like a familiar burden. 298 innocent passengers, including Dr. Vasquez, whose life and research were valuable enough to justify international incident. 5 F-22 Raptors with orders to protect American interests. 1 Russian pilot skilled enough and desperate enough to risk war to complete his mission. Ghost, Colonel Hayes transmitted. We have authorization for immediate engagement if the Su-35 makes any move to force your aircraft off course. But we also have orders to protect Dr. Vasquez and her research at all costs. First Officer Kim monitored their position on the navigation display, noting how close they had come to the point of no return, the moment when fuel states and geographic positioning would limit their options to whatever choice Ghost and the military commanders made in the next few minutes. Through the passenger cabin behind them, 297 people continued their routines of travel, unaware that their lives hung in the balance of a confrontation between superpowers. between pilots trained to kill and trained to protect, between national interests that measured individual lives against strategic advantages. Ghost closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command she had hoped never to carry again, and made a decision that would either save everyone aboard or doom them all to become footnotes in the history of military aviation disasters. Ghost opened her eyes and keyed the radio with the calm precision that had earned her both medals and court-martial proceedings. "Captain Volkov, I'm coming back to speak with Dr. Vasquez, but you need to understand something about American pilots. We don't abandon our passengers, and we don't surrender our aircraft. If you want to discuss terms, we do it within the framework of international law." The pause that followed stretched across multiple radio frequencies as Russian and American commanders processed the implications of direct negotiation between their pilots. In the military world, such communications represented either dangerous freelancing or brilliant tactical innovation, depending on the outcome. "Ghost," Colonel Hayes transmitted on the secure channel, "you are not authorized to negotiate with foreign military personnel. Maintain position and follow established protocols." But Ghost had learned in combat that established protocols were written by people who had never faced impossible situations at 37,000 feet, who had never felt the weight of civilian lives hanging in the balance, while enemy fighters prowled the darkness like sharks sensing blood. She unbuckled her harness and moved toward the passenger cabin, ignoring the protests from both Colonel Hayes and Captain Rodriguez. Behind her, the military and civilian pilots continued their tense monitoring of the Russian fighters' positioning, watching instruments that measured the razor-thin margin between successful diplomacy and catastrophic failure. In the passenger cabin, Ghost moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command, scanning seat numbers until she found 12A. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her laptop computer, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to working with classified materials. "Dr. Vasquez," Ghost said quietly, settling into the empty seat beside her, "I'm Major Thorne, Air Force. We have a situation developing that involves your presence on this aircraft." Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years looking over her shoulder, wondering when her former colleagues in Russian intelligence might decide that her defection and subsequent research represented an unacceptable security risk. The expression on her face suggested she had been expecting this moment for years. "How serious?" she asked. Ghost gestured toward the window, where the navigation lights of the escort fighters were visible against the star-filled sky. "Russian fighter aircraft have intercepted us specifically to make contact with you. They're demanding either transfer to their custody or forced diversion to a destination of their choosing." Dr. Vasquez closed her laptop and slipped it into her briefcase with movements that spoke of long practice in protecting sensitive materials. "The research I'm carrying represents 5 years of hypersonic weapons development. If it falls into Russian hands, it changes the strategic balance in ways that could take us decades to recover from." "What exactly are you transporting?" "Computational models for hypersonic guidance systems, materials science data for heat-resistant components, and targeting algorithms that make previous-generation weapons look like muskets compared to rifles." Elena's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the implications of her life's work. "Major, they can't be allowed to get this information." Ghost felt the familiar convergence of military necessity and moral imperative that had defined her most controversial decisions. Protecting Dr. Vasquez meant protecting American technological advantage, but it also meant risking the lives of every passenger aboard their aircraft. Through the cabin's small windows, she could see the Su-35 maintaining its threatening position, close enough that any sudden maneuver could result in collision. Behind them, the American fighters held their protective formation, ready to engage but constrained by the presence of civilians caught in the crossfire. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to understand something, Ghost said. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, your safety and the security of your research are my responsibility. But I also have 297 other lives to consider. Alina nodded with the understanding of someone who had spent her career balancing individual sacrifice against national security. Major, what do you need me to do? Ghost looked at the brilliant physicist beside her, then back toward the cockpit where Rodriguez and Kim waited for guidance that no manual had ever provided, and finally toward the windows where enemy and friendly fighters maneuvered in the deadly dance of modern aerial warfare. The decision she was about to make would either save everyone aboard or transform United Flight 2847 into the opening shot of an international incident that could reshape global politics, all because one woman had chosen conscience over orders, innovation over protocol, and desperate hope over calculated risk. Ghost returned to the cockpit with Dr. Vasquez's briefcase secured in her flight jacket, and a plan that violated every regulation in the military aviation handbook. Captain Rodriguez looked up as she settled back into the jump seat, his eyes reflecting the strain of maintaining level flight, while fighter aircraft maneuvered at lethal proximity to his civilian airliner. Major, what's the situation? Rodriguez asked. Dr. Vasquez is carrying research that's worth more than all our lives combined, from a strategic perspective, Ghost replied. But I'm not willing to trade 298 people to protect classified information, no matter how valuable. She keyed the radio to Captain Volkov's frequency. Russian fighter, this is Major Thorne. I propose a compromise. Dr. Vasquez will answer questions about her current research, but she remains aboard this aircraft, and we maintain our assigned flight path to Seattle. The response came after a pause filled with encrypted chatter on multiple frequencies, as both Russian and American commanders weighed the implications of direct negotiation between their pilots. Major Thorne, Volkov replied, my orders are specific. Dr. Vasquez must be transferred to Russian custody, or this aircraft will be diverted to international waters where transfer can be accomplished. Ghost felt the tactical situation crystallizing around her with the clarity that had made her legendary among military pilots. The Russian pilot was operating under specific orders, but he was also taking enormous personal and professional risks by conducting this operation in U.S. airspace. That suggested either desperation or authorization from the highest levels of Russian military command. Captain Volkov, she transmitted, you're an experienced combat pilot. You understand that forcing down a civilian aircraft over U.S. territory will result in immediate engagement by our fighters. Your aircraft is fast and maneuverable, but you're outnumbered 5-1, and we're operating in our home airspace. Colonel Hayes's voice cut through the military frequency. Ghost, you are ordered to cease all communication with the hostile aircraft. Tactical situation is deteriorating, and we have authorization for immediate engagement. But Ghost had learned that some situations required innovation beyond established doctrine, that the difference between successful mission completion and tragic failure often lay in the willingness to think beyond conventional parameters. Colonel Hayes, she transmitted on the military channel, request permission to attempt tactical resolution that preserves civilian safety while protecting classified materials. Negative, Ghost. You are not authorized for independent tactical decisions. Ghost looked at Rodriguez and Kim, seeing in their faces the same expression she had witnessed in countless combat zones. The moment when survival depended on someone willing to take responsibility for impossible decisions, to accept consequences that extended far beyond individual careers or lives. She switched back to Volkov's frequency. Captain, you and I both know that your mission parameters include returning safely to base with intelligence gathered. Dead pilots don't file successful mission reports. What are you proposing, Major? a demonstration of American resolve that satisfies your intelligence requirements while avoiding the international incident that would result from attacking a civilian aircraft. Ghost paused, calculating odds and options with the speed that marked elite combat pilots. You've gathered valuable intelligence about our response protocols, our fighter deployment patterns, and our willingness to protect civilian aircraft. That mission can be considered successful without forcing a confrontation that serves nobody's interests. The radio fell silent except for the background hum of multiple aircraft engines and the encrypted chatter of military commanders attempting to maintain control over a rapidly evolving situation. Through the cockpit windows, Ghost could see the Su-35 pilot, close enough now to make out details of his helmet and flight suit, two combat veterans separated by national boundaries, but united by their understanding of what it meant to fly aircraft designed for war. The moment balanced on the edge of decision, where individual choice would determine whether this encounter became a footnote in aviation history or the opening chapter of something far more serious. Captain Volkov's response carried the weight of a man making calculations that extended far beyond his individual mission parameters. Major Thorne, you have a reputation for making decisions that your superiors find uncomfortable. How do I know this is not another example of American tactical innovation at the expense of established protocol? Ghost felt a grim smile touch her lips. Her reputation had preceded her even into Russian intelligence files. The pilot who had saved American lives by breaking direct orders, who had been quietly forced into early,